So we're here today. We're going to talk about phenomena fatigue, and this is a topic that the Michigan Science Leaders Network has been digging into over the last 6 months or so, and they've been pulling on some research done by a woman from Michigan State, and she has great research, and she shared it with the MyStar staff as well a couple months ago. And so I'm going to share it with you today, and it's pretty interesting and thought-provoking. So I'm glad you're here. You do want to be in the slides again, if possible, because we are going to do some work in the slides in some small groups at some point. So on slide 2, if you need PLF credit or sketches, you go ahead and click that link and it'll sign you into the database as having attended. And so just as an introduction, let's talk a little bit about phenomena fatigue and what are we talking about when we say that. And so phenomena fatigue, it might be something that you're hearing from kids or your colleagues or yourself in your own mental conversations. This is taking forever. Why are we still doing this? When are we going to be done with this? Haven't we already done this? And so as you're, getting through that unit, are things dragging? Are people like wanting to move faster and be done with things? That might be phenomena fatigue. And so I'm going to ask you to jump in on slide 3 and click on that Jamboard link. And if you can share with us maybe some things that you've heard from teachers or students that might sound like phenomena fatigue, just grab a sticky note and contribute to that conversation there. Can't we just answer it and move on? Yeah. Haven't they cured it yet? No one is even dancing, the teachers and the students. Yep. Why don't we do anything fun anymore? Didn't we already answer this? Are we still on this unit? All right. We're still on the same unit. Why are we still doing this? Can't we just come up with a solution and be done and move on? Right? Can't we just build that dam or put a fan in the kennel? Yeah. Why do we have to look at all these details? Make a decision, move on. All right. So we're going to talk about some of the research that has to do with why you might be hearing that or thinking that or feeling that, and whether that's good or bad or how to react with that. So again, welcome. Thanks for being here. If we could just take a second and introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us your name and where you're from and maybe what grade levels you teach. And I guess I probably should have introduced myself. I always assume everybody knows who I am, but I'm Chris Gear. I'm the MyStar Professional Learning Facilitator. I've been in this very enjoyable position for almost 3 years now. Before that, I was a classroom teacher for 25 years, middle school science, and the last 5 years of my classroom career, including some of the COVID stuff, I worked with MyStar, helping them to write some of the units and pilot the units in the classroom and provide feedback, and also do a little bit of professional learning for them. And with me today is Lindsay Watch, who is also a member of our professional learning team, and she's one of our curriculum team facilitators. So she's a major curriculum writer, some of our older units, but also our newer and advanced units. And we have Barb McIntyre is with us today, just hanging out. She's also a retired MyStar teacher, and she works with our assessment team. And Marianne is with us today. Many of you know Marianne as the person who fixes all of your tech issues and anything having to do with subscriptions and things like that. She's our program director. So thank you. And we have a whole crew here. Oh, and Yone is here, and Yone just retired. Awesome. Yone also has worked with MyStar for quite a while. All right. Marianne is the wizard of MyStar. Yeah. Donovan's brand new teacher and a new grad from Michigan State. Awesome. He may even know our researcher we'll talk about in a minute. Julia and Katrina, thank you. Minna and Rebecca and Tammy, Anna, Megan, Amy, awesome. Lori, yeah, glad you're all here. Okay, we just had somebody join us, so I'm going to go ahead and put the link to the slides in the chat again. All right. Thanks for that. And let's go ahead and talk about our session outline today. So we're going to spend just a little time like kind of defining what's a phenomenon, what does NGSS consider a phenomenon, and why did we talk about phenomena so often? And then some of the efforts that MyStar has made to streamline units, because, you know, MyStar really does listen to the teachers, and teachers have been telling us for a while that these units are too long, right? So we've done a number of things to kind of tighten things up. And I do think some of our, especially our enhanced units, you know, things are a little better. But there's also this piece about, you know, some of the things we need to ask kids to do are actually good for them, even if it takes them a little time. So we're going to talk about some of the research about asking kids to do some hard things and why it might be necessary. And then we'll spend some time in a breakout room at the end, like we usually do with the learning series, and let you bounce some ideas off of your colleagues. And usually that's everybody's favorite part. So we'll have some time for that too. So thinking about what is a phenomenon, I dug through the NGSS using phenomenon NGSS instruction, kind of official guidance, and the NGSS authorities say that a phenomenon is something that's an observable event that occurs in the universe and that we can use our science knowledge to explain or predict. And so the goal of building knowledge in science is to develop general ideas based on evidence that can explain and predict phenomenon. So like this phenomenon idea is a key piece of science education. It's kind of like the whole point, right? And by doing that, by centering science education on phenomenon that students are hopefully motivated to explain, the focus of learning shifts from learning about a topic to figuring out why or how something happens. When you start figuring out why or how something happens, then you start pulling in those science and engineering practices and cross-cutting concepts. And so the point of using phenomenon to drive instruction is to help students engage in the practices to develop the knowledge necessary to explain or predict the phenomenon. Therefore, the focus is not just the phenomenon, it's the phenomenon plus the student-generated questions about the phenomenon that guides learning and the teaching. So by using that phenomenon, you set up a situation where kids can generate questions, and then you get that kind of student-driven learning situation, as well as asking kids to use those practices and cross-cutting concepts. So that's why we're using phenomenon. In MyStar units, we use phenomenon in a couple of different places. We have our unit challenge scenario for each unit, so that kind of stretches out throughout the whole unit. And that's going to be based around a complex phenomenon. It's got to be complex because we want, you know, to cover 3 or 4 PEs. We want to have, you know, 4 or 5 lessons about different science concepts that can all be built around that phenomenon. And with MyStar, one of the founding philosophies was that these scenarios should be based around something that's happening to people, and we're going to try to engineer a solution to make it better for, you know, people here on Earth, to make our lives better. So some of our scenarios Examples would be a town flooding, a new disease emerging, sports fish population changes in a river. That's the new ecosystems unit scenario. We revised it a little bit. Generating electricity off the grid, pesticide resistant bed bugs. There's an object headed towards Earth. Is it going to hit Earth? The asteroid in 8.4. So those are some kind of big complex phenomenon that drive the units. And then we also use phenomenon in each lesson, ideally. In those middle lessons, the anchor phase has some kind of focused phenomenon related to directly related to the content for that lesson. So in unit 6.1, the first middle lesson, the phenomenon is rain falling on a city street and running off. Not anything flashy, but definitely something that happens in nature that kids could explain. We have in 7.2, there's a phenomenon in one of the lessons about a volcano that grew 1,000 feet in 2 weeks. In 7.5, we have different water samples that have different tastes. In 8.3, we have a burning candle that moves, the flame moves when sound waves are near it. And then the climate change unit, one of the lessons starts with this phenomenon that average temperatures in Tokyo have increased a lot between their Olympics. So we do try to base each lesson on a phenomenon. But this kind of learning takes time, as we've all learned. We're not going to teach 6 or 7 units in a year. If you're going to ask kids and give them the opportunity to have this kind of learning experience, to generate questions, to gather evidence, to share their evidence, to construct explanations, to apply that core knowledge, it does take time. Now, MyStar knows that taking time and then taking too much time are maybe two different things. And, we admit that some of our earlier units, we were trying this out, teachers were trying it out. We were figuring things out along with the rest of the UNGSS universe about how to make this happen and flow. Some of our units were kind of long. There were some redundancies. There were some opportunities to streamline. And so as we are going through these unit enhancements, where 12 of our units have been enhanced in the last 1.5 or 2 years, and the other 10 are in the process right now. So by next summer, all of the units will have gone through this enhancement process. We're cutting down the number of lessons. We're looking for redundancies and places we can combine, maybe do 2 uncover shares and make it just 1 lesson. That shortens things up a little bit. The assessment team has worked very hard to make the assessments shorter, especially that pre-post assessment. We've added navigation guides and routines in between the middle lessons to help your kids stay connected to that unit challenge. Remember what we're trying to solve. How is what we just did related to that? How is what we're going to do next related to that, to keep that coherency in the storyline. But at the end of the day, we can't streamline the UNGSS out of the units. Kids still have to have that time to use those practices and use those cross-cutting concepts and ask those questions and solve the problems. So why does it still seem to take so long? Why, is there this temptation to just answer it and move on? Well, we had this opportunity for the MyStar Leadership Network, or excuse me, the Michigan Science Leadership Network, and then MyStar had this opportunity to talk with Christy Morris Thomas from Michigan State, and she has made some connections between this idea of slow and fast thinking and working with phenomena in the science classroom. So why does it feel so hard to get through this? So Christy Morris and Thomas, she's works at Michigan State's Create for STEM Institute and the Next Generation Project-Based Learning Initiative. And the Create for STEM Institute, I believe, is the one that's responsible for the Carbon Time curriculum. It's a limited curriculum. It has 3 or 4 units. They're all kind of based on carbon cycling around around the world and through different ecosystems and things like that. And it's mostly high school oriented, but it is very 3D NGSS aligned. And so her research was based on high school teachers implementing this carbon time curriculum in their experiences. And she started to make connections between what she was hearing from teachers and kids and this book that was written by an economist, and I believe he won a Nobel Prize actually, in 2011, called Thinking Fast and Slow. And so in this book, Daniel Kahneman proposes that we have two systems happening in our neurological, in our brains. And so we have this fast thinking system. So it's intuitive thinking. We use it all the time, day-to-day decisions, quick actions. We take the information, whatever bit of information that we have available at the time, and we make a decision and we move on. And that's a good thing for lots of things in our lives, right? If we don't want to take forever to decide, which brand of peanut butter to buy when you're standing in Kroger, right? So we need some fast intuitive thinking in our lives often. But there's also this second system that's running kind of in the background until we call it to the foreground, that involves slow, effortful thinking for deliberate decision making. And so thinking about this in terms of what's happening in the classroom can maybe kind of shed light on why it seems so hard to get through these units. So some features of fast and slow thinking. So our fast intuitive thinking is running automatically. You're only really thinking of the results. You're not even really thinking about, hey, I made a decision about that. It does not demand attentional resources, so it's not tiring. You look quickly for stories and visual patterns. You're connecting it to things you've already done. You make perceptions and you feel very, very solid about that. Yep, this is what's going on. This is what I'm going to do. That slow, effortful thinking is intentional. You really consciously using it. It demands attentional resources, which are limited. So it's going to feel maybe a little more tiring when you're using it. But it's looking for patterns in data, and it's acknowledging that there's uncertainty. So thinking about that in terms of science. Which system, that fast thinking or that slow thinking, is more closely associated with scientific practices and doing science? Which system is more likely to cause fatigue? And at the end of the day, which system do you want your science students to use more frequently? So there's a nice table here from a good book that some people put together to connect that NGSS piece with Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. And it's going to give you a little food for thought. And so we're going to invite you into into breakout rooms to kind of slow down and process what you've heard to this point, bounce some ideas off some people. And we're going to do a little notice and wonder visual thinking routine. And so there's a Jamboard here linked on slide 17. And you'll be in a breakout room, and you're going to go to the Jamboard, and you'll have a notice and a wonder spot, and you can just grab a sticky note and talk to your team, come up with some common things that you noticed, some common things that you wondered. All right, and so there's a slide for team 1, and then team 2, team 3, etc. So Lindsay's going to set up breakout rooms, and you're going to get an invitation to a breakout room. Again, we're going to ask you to jump into that Jamboard on slide 17. Say hello to the people in your breakout room. And you know what, Lindsay, let's make sure that that group is just one breakout room on their own, okay? And anyway, we'll give you some time in your breakout rooms, 5-10 minutes, to bounce some ideas off. What have you heard so far? What are you noticing? What are you wondering? All right, questions about that? Okay. All right, so everybody's back, thanks. So I would just invite you to maybe jump in that Jamboard and just do a quick kind of gallery walk and just kind of scan and take a look at some noticings and wonderings. I saw lots and lots of interesting kind of thinking going on here. People are having lots of kind of aha moments and still lots of questions about, you know, how are we going to do this? So I thank you very much for your input here. And we're going to keep moving, and hopefully some of those wonderings, we'll get to some of those. And then we will have time at the end, you know, to bounce some more ideas off of each other. So at the end of the day, using those scientific practices, the science and engineering practices, they do slow down your thinking.
Oh, sorry.
That's not necessarily a bad thing. Scientific communities have spent many generations developing practices that help their members avoid the pitfall of too hasty thinking and develop well-reasoned alternatives. These practices are an important cultural legacy, a gift from generations of scientists to our children today, a gift that they can use to employ slow thinking when they need it. And so I saw that quote and I just thought, in so many ways, how that connects to not only the science classroom and middle school students, but our world, social media, you know, the political scene, all of those things. Helping people recognize the need for some slow thinking and be able to use some slow thinking practices is probably a pretty good thing, even though it may not seem like the easiest thing right off the bat. And so it's definitely the, you know, the scientific kind of mindset that we're working towards. So I'm going to summarize some of Christy's specific research here, because there were some big ahas for me, and hopefully there will be for you too. She was looking at high schools in Michigan, where they were implementing the Carbon Time three-dimensional NGSS aligned curriculum. And she was trying to figure out what was going on in different classrooms and with different teachers that was making this implementation more successful or less successful. And so she was specifically looking at student identity work. How do students see themselves as scientists and as science students? And then she looked at teacher identity and how do teachers see themselves and their role? And how does that end up affecting kids and their academic achievements? And so how we view that work can impact our perception of the work. And so if we perceive that work as being valuable and useful and good, it may not seem to be as much of a drudge kind of process as, you know, if we don't understand that, you know, if we don't see ourselves as scientists doing slow and careful work, you know, things do seem to be dragging and taking longer. And so Christy's set up this kind of an example where students see themselves as smart science students. And so she has Mrs. Wolf versus Mrs. Sparrow. And I'm going to play this little vignette that she created that's available on YouTube. And I want you to think about these two classrooms, two good teachers, well-loved, well-respected, kids are happy, parents are happy, but two different kind of science identities that are going on.
In a science classroom, have you ever wondered who gets to identify as a smart science student? It turns out this is important, and classroom teachers make a big difference. Not that long ago, researchers explored this question by spending a year in two similar classrooms. The classrooms were in the same school district, at the same grade level, with teachers committed to high-quality science instruction who were both well known as outstanding educators. Students in both classrooms had positive attitudes about science, did well on science assessments, were engaged in their daily science activities, and were diverse racially, ethnically, and socioeconomically. But then, the researchers asked, "Who are the smart science students in your class?" and found things were no longer the same. In Mrs. Sparrow's classroom, smart science students were described as knowing facts, answering the teacher's questions correctly, and doing science at home. In Mrs. Sparrow's class, only 4 of the 15 students identified themselves as a smart science student, and strikingly, 5 students stated immediately, without hesitation, that they did not share any characteristics of the students they identified as the smart science students. These 5 were all females of color. In Miss Wolf's classroom, the smart science students were described differently. There, smart science students asked good questions, were good observers, were good group members, and kept trying even when they were wrong. In Miss Wolf's class, all 18 students identified themselves as a smart science student or indicated they shared those characteristics. So, what's going on? There's no one single smart science student identity. It's a socially constructed identity within the context of the science classroom culture. And developing this identity is not an individual endeavor. Further, this is an issue of equity. Is the smart science student identity compelling and accessible to every student? It turns out there's a lot that teachers can do to support the construction of a science classroom culture in which a smart science student identity is both compelling and accessible. Let's look at Miss Wolf's successes. She established classroom norms including we share scientific ideas and we solve problems together. She modeled and explicitly discussed what sharing ideas and solving problems together would look and sound like. She held students accountable for these expectations, asking students to explain their groupmates' ideas and consistently redirecting them toward their partners. In whole class conversations, Miss Wolf helped students share observations, build on others' ideas, and develop new questions and investigations together. Contrastingly, Mrs. Sparrow's classroom norm of turn-taking fostered small group work in which the more dominant and assertive students got more time with materials and received more recognition for their science ideas during the whole class time. Shifts toward three-dimensional science classrooms, in which students are collectively figuring out natural phenomena, can simultaneously support cultures in which smart science student identities are compelling and accessible to every student. Want to learn more? Try these resources. And thanks for listening.
All right, so thinking about that identity work and thinking about Mrs. Wolf's class and Mrs. Sparrow's class, which class is probably taking longer to get through a unit? It's probably taking more time to build those science identities by allowing and expecting students to generate those questions, bounce ideas off of each other, come to consensus, look at those phenomena and come to consensus, than it does to just divide things up and ask kids to get things done and move on. So keeping that in mind, Christy also looked at teacher work as identity work and how teachers see themselves and what their identifying stories are as teachers in the classroom. And so they initially were looking to see what support teachers needed to implement NGSS consistently with fidelity across entire buildings. And she has some research on that. That's very interesting. What do teachers need in order to have an NGSS aligned building-wide implementation. But she said as she was interviewing teachers about their use of carbon time, she and the researchers began to see these two patterns kind of emerge. And then they started looking at these patterns and then they started comparing them to student outcomes. And so the two patterns she has here in blue and kind of this peach color, teachers who see themselves as I help my students to be active, motivated learners, and teachers who see themselves as helping their students make sense of phenomena through three-dimensional science experiences. They sound like, they might kind of be the same thing, right? But as she continued to ask teachers, these kind of differences emerged. And so the teachers in the kind of blue category, they wanted their students to my students need a fast pace and interesting activities to stay engaged. And they liked the Carbon Time curriculum because it had interesting investigations and lots of hands-on materials. The peach colored teachers who were concerned about having students make sense of phenomenon, they see their students as capable of complex reasoning and wanting to achieve scientific understanding. And they said the best thing about Carbon Time was the tools to scaffold the students' three-dimensional learning. And so to dig a little deeper, some quotes from the teachers who fell into this blue category: fast-paced, interesting activities. The most important thing is that kids love science and love learning. And so we want to be engaging. We want kids always wondering, what are we going to do today? It's going to be different every day. Their students love labs. They love the hands-on. They like lighting things on fire, growing plants. They love those things, but repetition gets to them. Didn't we already do this? Why are we doing this again? And it was important for them to have activities and things that hooked kids and engaged them. But sometimes doing the explanations, building that consensus discussion got to be too much. And so they combined some of the tools and made it less work and made it a little faster for their kids. The peach colored teachers who were seeing their students as capable of complex reasoning and achieving scientific understanding, they saw themselves as their job is to provide opportunities where students can figure out what they know and don't know, give them the opportunities to collect data, talk to their peers, figure out what's happening, and in the end, be able to explain what's going on. They acknowledge that Carbon Time takes longer than other units, and they might be behind the teacher next door. But they were okay with that because they figured they were giving their kids what they need. They saw their kids as performing the experiments, but gathering data, making conclusions, becoming self-advocates for what they're learning, and helping kids come to consensus about, we don't know what's going on, but then we get to the point like, yeah, we get this and we understand that. And they liked the Carbon Time curriculum because it helped kids get to that point. And they said, yeah, sometimes the explanations are hard for kids, but the scaffolding in the curriculum helped them to explain the scientific phenomenon. And sometimes kids do complain, why am I writing this down? You're just going to tell us the answer tomorrow. So, the teacher switched things up a little bit and had kids write things in their notebooks and work with a small group and then come to consensus. So made some adjustments, when kids started to get a little frustrated. So I would like you to think about yourself as a teacher, and where do you fall on this identity scale between these two patterns that Christy identified, where on the one end we have teachers who, your identity is, I'm someone who engage my students in, I engage my students in interesting activities. I want them to be active, motivated learners. I want things to be fast-paced and interesting. And I replaced Carbon Time with MyStar here. So MyStar provides interesting investigations and hands-on activities. We often hear from teachers, we want more hands-on, we want more stuff for kids to do. And that's, completely legitimate. We get that, and we're trying to do that. Or are you more towards the important thing to me is to scaffold the three-dimensional learning to help students make sense of phenomenon, help your students do that complex reasoning and achieve that scientific understanding, and use MyStar tools and units to scaffold the three-dimensional learning. So I'm going to ask you now on slide 30 to jump in this Jamboard and just anonymously grab one of these little diamonds and place yourself on that continuum. Where do you fall in your personal teaching identity. All right, so thanks for your participation here. It does look like most people see themselves as somewhere in between those two. Maybe tilted a little more towards the making sense of phenomenon and three-dimensional experiences, but definitely, you know, wanting that active and motivated learning to be going on at some point. All right. So here's the thing. How are fast thinking and slow thinking related to these two patterns? And how are student science identities related to these two patterns? So seems fairly obvious, right? That blue teacher identity is employing a lot more fast thinking, right? I want my kids to be interested, engaged, moving along. The pink one or the peach one is more of the slow thinking piece. Which of those, according to Christy's earlier studies, help students build positive science identities and helped all students build positive science identities? The fast thinking part or the slow thinking part? So I want you to kind of hold that in mind. And then I want to drop this on you because this was an aha for me. When Christy was doing this carbon time research, they had access to a whole bunch of carbon time three-dimensional tests from all of these different high schools and different classrooms that they were working with. And they had the grad students to power through, you know, grading them all and crunching the data. And here's what they found. Those identifying stories, how you see yourself as a teacher and what's most important, are consequential because they correlate with learning gains on three-dimensional assessments. The teacher with higher learning gains classrooms had identifying stories about scaffolding three-dimensional engagement. They were more towards that peach person. The teachers in the lower learning gains classrooms more often told identifying stories about engaging students in interesting activities. So with that in mind, I'm going to review the key points, and then we're going to put you back in your breakout rooms and let you bounce some ideas off of your colleagues. So what we talked about today is that fatigue reflects our brain's slow, effortful thinking process. When things feel hard, you get tired. And it's hard thinking, you know, we're tired of this. Can we just move on? But those science practices of using that slow thinking, of being really sure about your data and considering that, you know, it might not be your first instinct might not be right. That's a cultural legacy that's important for us as a scientific culture. And if you can help students and teachers develop identities as science learners, as slow thinkers, as a good thing, that can begin to address some of that phenomenon fatigue. When you see yourself as doing good work and useful work, it can make it feel less tedious and make you less anxious to move on. So, breakout discussions. We're going to pop you back in your breakout rooms. There's a Jamboard here. We're going to use a visible thinking routine to ask you to connect what we've talked about today. How does this fit with what you already know? To extend how you might adapt your practice using what you've learned today. And then challenge, what support might you need? And, you know, what can we do for you? What do you maybe need from administration, those kinds of things? What support do you need to make these things happen? And we'll give you about 15 minutes or so, 20 minutes to talk. And then we'll ask you to, you know, if there's anything powerful that comes out of that, we'll give everybody an opportunity to share. And then we'll send you on your way. All right. Thank you. It looks like there was lots of thoughtful conversation about things that, you know, we don't always have all of the answers to, but there's lots of food for thought here. And so I am going to ask if there's a spokesperson from each group to just tell us a couple of one or two key takeaways that happened, even if it's not a sticky note necessarily on here. You know, what did you come up with in your group? So team one, what would you like to share as a key takeaway?
This is Jonay. One of the things that we talked about is that we know that the thinking is deeply important, but it seems that the students don't have the stamina that they did even a few years ago. I mean, it's more, since COVID, it's more, just tell me what I need to do, just let me get on the computer and do this. They really don't want to think at all.
Yeah.
And the challenge, we spent the last few minutes talking about this, is, and I know that we did it as part of the NGSS review team. Chris, I think you were a part of that. We've done it at MSTA and offered workshops for them. But a learning series for the administrators, the curriculum directors, the evaluators, even the school board members, so that they can understand the scaffolding and the progression map between 6th, 7th, and 8th, that there's a complaint from especially the curriculum directors that you're not hitting all the standards in 6th grade by not covering all 6 units. Well, unless they have been in a classroom, there's no way you're going to get them to understand that, because they're looking at a pacing guide where you're looking at actual student learning and trying to get them to go for the depth of a swimming pool and not the depth of a wading pool.
So I hear you, Yone. We did publish over the summer an administrative guide. It's a PDF. It's like 3 or 4 pages long that summarizes some of that. And the goal was that that would be a tool to have a conversation with administrators and school board members and curriculum directors. And it does talk about how you can't teach everything. Now we kind of condensed it into all, you know, on one page. But that is an ongoing conversation. In fact, I was just telling Lindsay, Steph and I are meeting with some PLFs and a group of teachers at Kent ISD tomorrow. We're going to be there virtually, and Steph's doing a whole presentation on how you can't teach everything. And we did a learning series about 1.5 years ago on that too. So we do have some resources on that. And if that's a conversation that anyone wants to have with their administrators, we have some resources, and we're happy to help you have that conversation. Because we do have some good evidence pieces from experts in the field that say, you know what, can't teach all this. So it's not just coming from us. And
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Lindsay posted the link in the chat to that admin guidance document. And so, you know, share that with your administrators and invite them to have a conversation with you about that.
Yeah.
Happy
But the
to-
problem is when you're talking to people who don't have classroom experience, there's basically nothing you can do to help them understand, just because they're so dogmatic and they're digging in and actually wanting to blame somebody rather than to understand.
And I mean, hopefully all we can say is, hey, you know, the curriculum that your district chose, those people are saying you can't do it all. So, but I'd be happy to hang out and talk to anyone afterwards too, if you want more information about that, or, you know, some ideas, because that is an ongoing problem. We talk about it in phase 1. We've started talking about it in PLF training. We're talking about it tomorrow with Kent ISD people. I know that's a problem. Team 2. Key takeaway.
I guess the slower discussions are allowing for more processing time. So we're always going to have our leaders are shooting their hands up, those enthusiastic kids, but as they share their ideas, it's inspiring the other kids. So the ones that are a little bit slower to react are less inclined to talk out loud. But once that conversation starts going, you see more engagement and more enthusiasm. Yeah, so that was basically, we've got a lot of points on that. But I think we kind of slid over to our biggest challenge is that absences are very difficult for us to catch up on, especially if the kids are missing more than one day consecutively. So that's where we would need support on that. And how do we bring this discussion home legally? We can't record our classrooms most of the time and that sort of thing. How do we make up for the kids that miss a day or a week at a time?
Yeah. I don't have good answers for that. I mean, you can't recreate collaborative lab experiences, at home for kids. I know that the reteach activities that are in the revised units have reteach activities in the lessons that have embedded assessments. That's part of an opportunity to kind of help kids get caught up if they miss things. But yeah, you can't recreate that classroom experience at home. I don't have good answers for that. T, let's move on though, because I don't want to run out of time. And again, happy to hang out and talk more with you all afterwards. But team 3, a key takeaway?
I think we spent a little time talking about how we can help students to see, like, that we know that it's challenging for students. We know that it helps them to develop a richer understanding when they do these slow thinking strategies. So we were talking a lot about practices, like how might we make that less challenging for students. So we talked about like chunking the units so students are seeing the progression without giving it away, like in the bubble map, helping them to see where they've come and a little bit about where they're going, so that they can see that this deep thinking, this slow thinking is moving them forward, and we are making progress. It might feel like we've been talking about this darn river forever, but we've learned a lot by talking about that river. And so we talked about maybe even giving like a pre-post item at the beginning of the unit, midway through, and then at the end as a post test, and letting kids use a different color each time to revise their thinking and to build on their thinking. As part of that, everybody's participating in this slow thinking, what have I learned? And I can see that I'm making all of this growth and all of this progress, in hopes that helps them to feel like, to at least manage some of the fatigue and to see that I am making progress, even though it feels like it's slow going. And then we really felt like, teachers just, it's the pacing thing, this pressure that they have. I think team 1 kind of said the same thing. The pressure to cover everything is a real challenge for teachers, both intrinsically and from the outside. We feel bad if we don't get it all done. We want to check all the boxes. So
Lindsay, we maybe need to do Lindsay and I were talking about repeat learning series. Maybe that's one that we need to repeat this winter. Talking about how you can't teach everything. And then you can invite your administrators to attend, maybe, hopefully. Thanks a ton, Barb. That was super useful. Barb has always great creative ideas and good ideas of how to use our assessment resources too. And the bubble map and those navigation guides to help kids be aware of they are making progress. All right, team 4, key takeaway.
Okay, sorry, we have multiple devices in one room. So, okay, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, yeah.
I'm not muted.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, you can hear me, Lindsay? Thank you. Okay, so we had quite a bit of conversation around just the preparation on our part as educators for the lessons, for the units, and the amount of time and energy that just goes into being prepared for the daily tasks that we do with our students, and how just the advanced preparations, how that really helps us to be able to be there maybe a little more mentally with our students, where we lift some of those worries and some of those stressors. There's just so much to be ready for. And knowing that we can't do everything, but the things that we do, we want to make sure we're doing them well. We want to make sure that we're giving students those deeper experiences and using those bigger thinking skills. So just giving ourselves permission to slow down with that, to be prepared ahead of time, to get things in order, to lean on one another. That way, when it comes time to do the teaching and the work within the classroom, we just really feel like we can support that thinking a lot more. Did I miss anything, group? No? Okay.
All right. Thanks a ton. Yeah, I know it's hard to prep for MyStar. You're going to have good days and bad days. Some days, you know, you're on fire, and other days you're just kind of winging it. You know, give yourself grace, and do your best. And your kids are, you know, they're going to get good stuff out of it no matter what. But I do appreciate that. Helping each other prep, maybe kind of breaking up some of that work, allows you that time to really think about what's going to make a good conversation in your class. And we do have phase 2 sessions on productive talk, if that's of interest to you, and also on the bubble map, if that's of interest to you. And we'll talk about the navigation guides and things like that. And so we're offering those both this fall. I think they're both offered in October. We're doing assessments, if you're interested in what Barb was saying, in November, and then we're going to repeat them again in the winter. So you know, building those skills, you know, can be helpful too. So it is 5:02 and I do want to let you go. Thank you so much for your time and effort and conversation here. You know, I don't have all the answers. I do think, you know, we got some interesting things to think about from Christy. And the MyStar team is continually looking for ways to, you know, trim and streamline and cut the redundancies where we can. So without trimming the NGSS out of it. So thanks again for your time and effort. If you're good, we're good. Go on and have a good evening. If there's something that you want to talk about with us specifically, we'll hang out for a little bit and be happy to chat with you. So thanks again for your time, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.